Johnny Bishop looked at his wife, Beth. He hoped for a moment that she was joking. In an instant, he realized that this was not so. He said, "What's the matter with you, Beth?" Seconds earlier, Beth had told him she was going on a 7-day trip to a hotel in Chicago with her boss, Daniel Dewitt. Beth said, "I know you might be upset, but this shouldn't affect you too much. I just need to get over it. We've been working together for the past 6 months. We became interested in each other sexually. And after this love trip, you'll still see him at work. He is married and has 3 small children. What does his wife think about this? These are 2 different questions. It is not like you. First, we're only going to do this once. When we return, I will return to you and be the same faithful wife I have always been." Ha! Are you saying that you haven't slept with this guy yet, even though you're so close? No, we haven't slept yet. What about his wife? She is not your concern. It's his business. Her name is Margaret, right? Her youngest child is probably 6 years old. Leave her alone, Johnny. No, I bet he lied to her. I bet he told you to lie to me, right? She lowered her eyes. She said, "Johnny, I need this. It's a kind of closure for me and for him. Please don't ruin this. I never liked this guy. Now I hate him. So, I intend to do everything to punish him for this, and his wife will be the first. There are other things I could do. Johnny, you need to think. These are powerful people. My law firm could squash you like a bug on your windshield. Who do you think you are? Stupid bitch. This guy ruined my marriage. He's a dead man. You too." Johnny turned sharply and left the room. Beth took out her phone. I dialed a quick number. She said, "Dan, everything went badly. Perhaps you need to do something." He replied sarcastically, "I told you to lie. Perhaps you ruined everything. He's going to get a rude awakening, I promise you that. Dan, don't mess with him. It's not his fault. I'll do what I have to do." He hung up. Beth sobbed quietly. She agreed with her husband. She really was a dumb bitch. She decided she had to warn Johnny. Tell him to be careful for now and protect his business. She walked up the stairs. The bedroom door was open, but Johnny wasn't there. She called him. There was no answer. She saw that his work computer and briefcase were missing. She heard his Honda motorcycle start. She ran to the window just in time to see him drive away up the street. Just before he turned the corner, he raised his right hand. She saw that he was giving her the middle finger, as if he knew she was watching. She sat down on the bed and cried a little. Then she took out her phone and dialed his number. She was going to tell him that she was canceling all plans. Ask him to come back and not do anything hasty. His phone rang right there in the room. He was under the bed. She was at a dead end. Perhaps he is too. She called her father. Johnny and Beth met in law school. Beth was the daughter of rich and powerful people. Her father was a partner in a very large and influential law firm. She was going to law school, intending to avoid this firm and maybe try to do something good. She was a beautiful woman and always had been. She was tall, blonde, with blue eyes and a magnificent figure. In high school and college, she had her choice of boyfriends. She was a wild girl from a young age. In college, she slept with all the guys in the same jock fraternity and then hooked up with some of the counterculture types. But during her senior year, she realized she couldn't get into law school in the Ivy League or maybe anywhere at all. She pulled herself together, got good grades, and entered Loranda Law School in Virginia. She met Johnny on the first day. He spoke to her during orientation. He sat down next to her. He didn't look anything special, 5'9", slim, with short brown hair and the same color eyes. But he had a pleasant smile and a deep voice. After orientation, he asked her out for coffee. She accepted. They sat for a while, sipping lattes and talking. He found out from her the whole story of her life. And he told her mine to some extent. He was a military child who lived all over the world. His father was a sergeant, and his mother wrote advertising copy for professionals and car dealers. He had a full scholarship to this law school. In addition, he was a programmer. He had a dream of doing copyright law for programmers and others in the field, perhaps also for mathematicians. He has already applied for a copyright on one line of code he wrote. She found him quite interesting. She had a one-room apartment nearby, and he took her there. They shook hands at her door. She gave him a big smile, but she knew he wasn't exactly her type. She always liked men who were big, looked tough, and tended to take matters into their own hands. Six-pack abs were a plus. She was open to a lot of guys like that. Johnny was not one of them. He knew this too. She was out of his league. Rich and beautiful versus poor and ordinary. Nevertheless, he decided to try. He didn't know what type of guys she used to satisfy her. It turned out that they both attended all the same classes. The first course was divided into two parts alphabetically. Her last name was Brady, so in constitutional law class the first morning, he sat next to her. He was surprised that the seat next to her was empty. He couldn't miss this opportunity. When this activity was over, they had cakes, then criminal law, then contracts. They sat next to each other in every class. They had lunch in a nearby canteen. After the last class, she agreed to have coffee again. He asked her to marry him there. She smiled at him. "I'm afraid I'll have to put off getting married a little. Ask me next year." ILL ask. "And if you ever want to agree, please let me know." "No problem. Do you believe that a woman should take care of herself before marriage?" "Absolutely not." "Fine, because that ship has already sailed." She was laughing. "You know what? Let's start a study group. You and me and maybe someone else. What do you say?" "It sounds good. You can study with me." "What to do?" His eyebrows rose like Groucho's. She said, "Study." But she had a certain look. She knew she needed a learning partner. She also knew that she needed sex. She decided to give Johnny a chance. For a change. She said, "Let's start now. Let's go to." He followed her to her house and up the stairs to her door. She opened the lock, walked in, turned around, and kissed him. To say that he was surprised would be an understatement, because despite his flirtatious ways, he never thought he had a real chance. Especially so fast. He thought Beth was a little impulsive. To his great advantage now. Johnny was no stranger to sex. He had girls all over the world. An American is often in demand abroad, as locals consider all Americans to be rich. Johnny learned a lot. In college, he made full use of his early practice. He might not look like a hottie, but when he had the chance, he could act like one. He gave Beth careful attention. "You have achieved success. I'm absolutely delighted. Let's take a shower and eat, and then we can learn. Maybe," with a mischievous smile. But with one break, they still studied after dinner. "We worked until midnight. We fell asleep at 1 o'clock. The next morning, they went to class, arriving on time at 9. They had a sideshow in the shower, really. They added 2 boys and 1 girl to their study group in the first week. Thomas Kennedy, Jason Burke, and Mary Lester. Mary was a pretty brunette from the southern part of the state, perhaps a little overweight. Thomas was a tough guy who played college football until he injured his knee. Jason was a cute blonde guy. They all participated well in class and seemed prepared. The semester went on as usual. Beth and Johnny were not yet an exclusive couple. Johnny lived in a room in the graduate dorm, but mostly he slept at Beth's. On weekends, they were sometimes interested in other things. Beth will always be attracted to big, muscular guys. There were many of these at the university. Beth made Johnny promise not to hit on Mary, and she had no intention of having sex with Jason or Thomas. She felt a little sorry for this promise, since Thomas was her type. But she knew that the study group would easily fall apart if sexual jealousy got involved. Anyway, the university was full of guys who were her type. Johnny took several college girls to his room on the weekends. He used protection with them. He asked Beth to use it with her weekend sports lovers too. She agreed. The holiday break has passed and classes have begun again. The second semester was about the same as the first. Both received high marks. As summer approaches, Beth told Johnny that she was going to Italy for 6 weeks with her mother and little sister. Father will be there from time to time. Johnny worked in the summer on a sailing yacht, taking people out to the Chesapeake Bay. Returned to school tanned, slim, and muscular. When Beth saw him, she dragged him straight into bed. They connected again in the same way as before. Beth wanted Johnny all to herself. He was the best in bed of all the men she had been with. Sometimes she still wanted other men, just for variety. Johnny lived with her all the time. They talked about loyalty. She told him that maybe she wasn't quite ready for this yet. They agreed that everyone could explore something different, but not in the apartment. They shared the rent. Johnny sold 2 copyrights to a government agency. He received a lump sum payment and monthly payments. So he had money. They didn't really discuss it. Beth has always been rich. It didn't occur to her how Johnny was paying his share. By the end of the second year, they were practically an exclusive couple. No explicit agreement. They simply stopped dating others. Beth did not go abroad with her mother that summer. The younger sister went. She and Johnny went to a resort in West Virginia and stayed there for 6 weeks. They shared the costs. This place had horse riding, tennis, golf, and a large swimming pool. Beth was amazed by Johnny. There seemed to be nothing athletic that he couldn't do with a little practice. However, he didn't make a big show out of it. The others didn't notice. Beth saw it. One day, after Johnny beat a young guy at tennis, Beth took him camping. She said, "Remember when you proposed to me? You said that as soon as I decide to accept, I should inform you." "Yes. Well, I am informing you." He smiled at her. He said, "We can choose the ring when we get back to civilization." She jumped into his arms. My third year of law school flew by. They got married a month after graduation. Her family insisted on a big celebration. The ceremony took place in the great Episcopal Cathedral in Washington. A reception followed at a hotel in Bethesda. Johnny met more lawyers than he could count, men and women. He also met 2 senators, several congressmen, and 2 cabinet members. Johnny's parents were stunned by it all at first, but his father, Hank, was a staff sergeant in the Army and didn't stay impressed for long. His mother, Esther, although she found it all a bit unnecessary, kept her tongue, which could be sharp, behind her teeth. Later, after the honeymoon, Johnny wrote her a separate letter of gratitude, concerning only her patience in the face of numerous provocations. When she received it, she showed it to Hank, and they both laughed. Hank loved his new daughter-in-law. Esther had her doubts. She mentioned this to Johnny when he announced the wedding. He understood what she meant, but he wanted what he wanted. He told her that if it didn't work, he would soon know and be able to recover. Despite her previous altruistic intentions, Beth went to work for her father's company. Johnny rented a small office near Washington and began his private practice. He had income from copyrights, now 3. He had another one on the way. The work he did for himself introduced him to the process and some of the people he needed to know in the writer's office. He also had programmer friends, a network of whom. They referred clients to him. His practice was doing well, even beyond the monthly royalty payments. Beth's father insisted that they sign a prenuptial agreement. Johnny didn't mind this. The deal was simple. They will keep their money separately. Each will pay half of the spousal expenses. Amendments were made because Beth provided health insurance. William Brady, Beth's father, did some research before the wedding. So he knew Johnny was from a military family. He knew Johnny had some income. However, his investigation did not reveal the latter's copyright. It was much more profitable than the first 2, so he thought Johnny was just pretty well off. In fact, Johnny was rich thanks to the new copyrights. All this money went to investments. This was not a topic of discussion with Beth. She told him about her work at a law firm. People there at first considered it inherited, unlikely to meet the company's standards. She knew it. All other new hires were graduates of top-notch law schools. Not her. However, she was as smart as them, and even smarter than many. Plus, she always looked great. She worked hard, didn't flirt, and took a responsible position. Her father made sure that she was not given any favors because of him. She didn't need it. 3 years later, she was confidently moving towards partnership and earning good money. Johnny rejoiced at her success at the firm. He knew how smart she was and never doubted that she would succeed. He was somewhat concerned about her working hours, but he knew she had something to prove. Their home life and sex life were still fine. They were compatible in and out of bed. They liked the same movies, books, and music, except she didn't like classic country music, but he did. He had headphones for this. In bed, they were always at least good together. Sometimes, after a break from work, it seemed like they might set the bed on fire. Beth liked one country song, Ring of Fire. Sometimes she wanted to have sex under it. The bed never caught fire. Johnny's practice grew quietly. This was a specialized area and never attracted the attention of Beth's firm. He also had several new copyrights. The government had priority over these rights. They paid quite well. Johnny founded a limited liability company called TLC to invest and write code. Legal practice was separate. He was the sole owner of TLC. So Johnny had no problem paying his half of the expenses, and neither did Beth. Halfway through her 4th year, she was assigned a case led by Dan Dewitt. He was a partner in a big deal with the SEC supporting the merger of two software companies. It was believed that the Federal Trade Commission (FTC) and the Department of Justice might also intervene, since both companies had valuable software that, when combined, could give them a big advantage in the competitive market. Beth and Dan worked closely together from the beginning, along with a team of 6 other lawyers. About 2 months into the project, Johnny met Dan at the firm's annual holiday party. Before this, he had only glimpsed Dan and his family at company events. Now he and Beth were sitting at the table with Dan and his wife, Margaret call me Margie. He was 43, she was 35. They had 3 children, a boy and 2 girls, 10, 8, and 6 years. Margie proudly showed Johnny pictures of each child and all 3 of them playing. Johnny really liked Margie. She was of average height with fiery red hair, a beautiful face, and a good figure. She worked part-time as a librarian at a local high school. Johnny learned all this over dinner, talking with Margie while their spouses and others discussed work. Dinner ended and dancing began. Johnny was a little surprised when Dan immediately asked Beth to dance. Beth glanced at Johnny and received a furrowed brow, but she took Dan by the hand and went with him. Johnny turned to Margie and raised an eyebrow. She smiled at him, stood up, and asked him to dance. She was an excellent dancer. Johnny got used to Beth, who wasn't bad. Johnny had natural athletic ability and was very good on the dance floor. They danced the jitterbug, another fast dance, and then a slow dance. Johnny found himself very attractive to Margie. This attraction was mutual, but after dancing slowly, he whispered, "Maybe we should dance with our spouses." She looked at him with disappointment and then nodded. She said, "Dan can't dance. I have to defend myself all the time. It has no rhythm." She smiled at him, turning her head away from their table. Dan and Beth were already at the table. Dan was in Johnny's place. Johnny extended his hand towards Beth, who only hesitated briefly before allowing herself to be pulled onto the dance floor. They had a nice time swaying to a mid-tempo number. Then the slow song started playing again, and as they danced, kissed, Beth said, "I see you get along well with Margaret." "Yes, she's great. She dances well. I noticed. She must have some kind of training. She's a librarian. She just has good rhythm, agility on her feet."
Yeah.
What I noticed the most was the work in my hips. "Don't worry, Beth. I want to point out that your boss didn't ask me about dancing with you. He's not the kind of person who's naturally polite." "Does that mean he just takes what he wants, Beth?" "Johnny, that's enough. We work together. This is all. He has a family and his sexy wife. Until he tries to take my sexy wife, be careful, Beth." Acknowledged lawyer. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but Johnny was on his guard. Over the next 4 months, Johnny paid more attention to Beth's work and what she said about it at home. Before the holiday party and for some time after, Beth discussed Dan and the team. She was not allowed to tell him the details of the job, but she was talking about personal matters. Dan's children, the relationship behavior of the other team members who were all unmarried. Office gossip. But for the past 2 months, the gossip continued and Dan was rarely mentioned. Johnny noticed this. He decided to do a deep dive into Dan, the firm, and the merger. When he started, he already knew a little about the merger. Blackburn, the larger of the two firms, wanted to acquire Newstar. Johnny had a little business with Newstar. He licensed some code to them on an exclusive basis. He received income from this. Well, his sole proprietorship was generating income. The fact is that Newstar's license to use the code was not transferable without TLC's permission. When he looked into it further, he found that the merger would not affect it. In other words, in order for a new company to use his code, it will have to obtain permission from the TLC. All this paperwork was processed by TLC's legal counsel and signed by Jerry Dolan. Dolan was one of 5 TLC employees. Johnny wondered why Beth was even around the case since TLC was a part of it. He then thought that since he owned 100% of TLC, his name would not appear on public documents. In fact, there were no public documents. There were tax returns, but they were not listed as an LLC. In any case, they were supposed to be confidential, so perhaps the firm was unaware of his situation. He believed that if this was so, this was a big flaw on their part. But so far neither Beth nor anyone else had mentioned anything about it, although it was a possible obstacle to the merger. Johnny also hired a security firm to investigate Beth's firm, Carrington and Brady. Specifically, he wanted a report on a group at a merger firm, also about named partners, including William Brady, Beth's father. He had collected information gathered from conversations with staff or about staff, conversations with spouses in coffee shops, and general observation of the comings and goings in the company's office. There was nothing particularly interesting except that Beth and Dan Dewitt often dined together and not often with others from the firm. They went to several places for lunch and once to a luxury restaurant. This lunch lasted more than 2 hours. This was 2 weeks before the report. Beth's father was investigated. Some employees thought he had a special interest in Julia Stanton, his new partner, but there was nothing to indicate their sexual relationship. Hints, always interesting. William was 60 and in shape. Carrington, his partner, was also 60 years old and divorced, apparently due to his ex-wife's infidelity. As the SEC filing approached, Johnny called Jerry Dolan and asked if there had been any communications from Carrington and Brady regarding the merger. Dolan told him that he had received a letter the day before asking him to sign a waiver of exclusivity regarding his code. In the letter, it looked like a simple formality. Johnny told Jerry to put the letter aside and not answer it. Then he waited to see what would happen. A week later, Jerry received a call from a member of the SEC team. Not Beth or Dan, Nate Conklin. Jerry put it aside, saying he needed to consult the owner. Conklin asked, "Who is this? I didn't find any information about this. This is important for us. We need an answer." Jerry said, "I'll get back to you soon." The conversation is over. Meanwhile, Dan and Beth discussed their mutual attraction. The initial part of the matter was almost completed, and they had not yet acted on what they felt. They were talking, and while they were having lunch at Mason's, they kissed in their booth. Both knew they could soon go their separate ways in their work. Dan invited Beth to spend a week with him at the Stonewall Hotel in Chicago. He said they could tell their spouses it was a work trip since some Newstar offices were there. Dan said they won't be there. They will stay in bed, go to the show, to dinner. They'll have a good time. Beth wanted this. Dan was the epitome of the type of man who turned her on. Big, bold, fit, and persistent. His dark hair was always tousled, and he was rarely closely shaven. He looked like a movie star. She wanted him, but she loved Johnny and was not inclined to lie to him. She told Dan this. He made the reservation anyway. He thought of Johnny as a small fish, someone who could be pushed aside if necessary. After the scene where Beth told Johnny about the upcoming trip, Dan was alarmed by her call. The last thing he needed was family drama from Margie. He pondered how to prevent Johnny from contacting her. He decided to run over it. The next day, his secretary called Johnny at work. Johnny answered and was told, "Stay on the line for Mr. Dewitt." He thought about hanging up, but he was curious. He decided to give Dewitt a minute, no more. He turned on the device to record telephone conversations. Dewitt immediately went to the line. He said, "Mr. Bishop, I'm calling to try to avoid any problems you might get into if you talk to my wife about this proposed trip to Chicago." Johnny said, "Yes." Dewitt paused. "You could get into a lot of trouble professionally if you talk to her about this." "How? You can't do anything to me. This company is one of the largest in the country, in the world. If we step on you, you will feel it. You're a big jerk, Dewitt. Both you and your company are a complete mess. You have no idea who I am or what you can do to harm me. Speaking of sex, I promise you, if you have sex with my wife, I will do everything in my power to destroy you and everything you have." Pause. Legally, of course. Dewitt was furious. "Try it, fool. I'm not going to cancel. I'll have sex with her if I want, and there's nothing you can do about it." By the time he finished, the line was dead. Johnny stopped the recording and copied the conversation onto his phone so he could play it back for Beth later. He then set up a conference call with Jerry Dolan and Rick Maynard, a man from the security company he hired to investigate Beth's company. He said, "Listen to this, guys, and write it down." He played a recorded phone call with Dewitt. When the recording ended, Maynard said, "This guy is dangerous. What can he do to you? He seems to have no idea who I am or what I do. I want you to keep an eye on him and the firm and try to figure out what they're going to do. I would like to know if someone tries to dig into my finances, licenses, taxes, etc. Some of these things would be illegal if they did that." Maynard said, "Okay, but it won't be easy." "I know. Do what you can. I will email you all my credentials." Jerry Dolan said, "What about a merger? I don't know how important the license is to them. They don't make a big effort to get an agreement. We'll see how it goes. Perhaps this is quite important. I get a good stable income from the license. Perhaps I underestimated her. I'll take care of it." Johnny decided to return home. He needed to deal with Beth. He tried to call her at work, but was told she was taking the day off. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. He began to worry about her. When he arrived home, Beth was nowhere to be found. Looking around, he saw that some items of clothing, a toothbrush, and a personal laptop had disappeared. He used an app to find her phone and found that she was at her parents', 5 miles away. He ordered pizza. When she arrived, he opened a light beer and ate his dinner. He then got into the car and drove to the Brady family's house. There were lights on and several cars parked in the yard. The gates were open. Johnny thought there was a party there. He parked in the circular area in front of the main entrance, got out and walked towards the door. There was no music. He rang the bell. Beth's mother, Livia, opened the door. She looked worried, but she opened the door and stepped aside. She said, "I think you better come in, Johnny." In the living room, he saw Beth, her father William, 2 lawyers from the firm whom he barely recognized, and Dewitt. Beth sat in a chair next to her father. Dewitt was on the other side of the room with 2 other attorneys. William said, "We were just talking about you, Johnny, about what to do with the current situation." "About? Have you made any decisions?" "Well, we were thinking of contacting you to talk. Together." "Talk, then. One thing I'm wondering is whether your firm is going to try to squash me like a bug. That's what this idiot was threatening, and also your own daughter. So, we would prefer not to resort to such measures." William was serious. Johnny turned to Beth. "Are you still planning on having sex with this guy?" Livia sighed and said, "Don't be rude, Johnny." "Sorry, Livia, but that's exactly what Beth said she was going to do later this week. Naturally, I'm interested." Dewitt began to speak, but William stopped him. William said, "Johnny, you have to understand that these office romances happen, quite often due to work stress and shared experiences. And what? Should I do something? Just let it end. What's the harm in that? Just a week." William's face was serious. Johnny said, "It won't happen. If she goes, we're done with her. No refund. If she comes with me tonight, maybe we can save something." "Hope so." William said, "We may have reached a dead end." Johnny looked at Beth. He said, "Forget about all this. The car is outside. I invite you to come home with me. We can talk there without being a jerk." Dewitt jumped out of his seat. Johnny stood up too. Dewitt was bigger, fit guy, but Johnny saw him on the dance floor. Johnny laughed. "Come on, big boy. Let's see what you can do." He spread his arms. William yelled at Dewitt to sit down. Beth screamed, "Stop, stop." Dewitt didn't move. Then he sat down again. Johnny didn't sit down. He looked at Beth. He said, "It's now or never." She smiled. It was an Elvis song that they both loved. Johnny sang, "Tomorrow will be too late. Now or never. My love can't wait." Beth stood up and walked towards Johnny. She looked at him. She said, "I can go home tonight, but I am an independent person, and I want to go on a trip." Johnny said, "I'm really sorry to hear that. Your invitation has been canceled, and you idiot, Margie will hear about me. And Beth, I will file for divorce before you leave." William stood up and said, "That would be a huge mistake on your part, Johnny. I show no mercy, I swear." Johnny pointed at William. "Big words, just like this idiot. But this is nonsense. Come on, try it." He turned to leave. There was a big guy in a turban standing at the door, dark, with a beard. There was a fight and Johnny left the house. But Johnny never looked back. He was afraid that someone might have a weapon. He got into the car and drove away. No shots fired. On the way home, Johnny thought he had injured Dewitt. He saw him pass out as he rushed past him. So he parked the car at a distance from his house and ran there. No cops, no sirens. Johnny went in the back door, gathered a few more things, and came out the same way. Still no police or sirens. He returned to the car and drove away. He decided to hide in an apartment that his law firm kept for visitors. He knew where the key was kept. He went there, set up his computer, and relaxed. He used the computer to access the security system in his home. No obvious activity. He turned off the lights remotely and locked the house. He also changed the access code to deny Beth access. He fell asleep. Meanwhile, at the Brady house, Stefan, the guy in the turban, quickly recovered from his fall. But Dewitt came to his senses only a few minutes after being doused with cold water. Beth and Livia helped him sit on a chair. He had one hand on his head, the other on his groin. He moaned a little. He said, "Did you call the police?" William said, "No. Why? We are technically guilty of a crime. He's not a fool. He probably had the recording turned on his phone. I thought Stefan could take her from him. It was a mistake. One of several, it seems to me." Dewitt said, "Let's do what we planned. Let's crush him." Beth said, "No. Everything got out of control. It's my fault. Crap." She started crying. She ran upstairs. Beth went into her old room. She locked the door. She sat down in a chair and tried to calm down. She needed to reconsider the last few days. William looked at Dewitt. Livia brought him orange juice. The other two lawyers were sent home. William patted Dewitt on the knee. He said, "You and Beth ruined everything. If she weren't my daughter, I would fire her. If she weren't my daughter, I would fire you on moral grounds. We haven't done anything yet, and she is your daughter. If young Johnny makes good on his threat and tells your wife, what will you do? I have children. I'll try to get through this, We didn't do anything. It must mean something. So nothing will happen between you and Beth anymore. Understood. Yes. Can it be replaced by the sect? Well, maybe. Not so easy. But yes, this has to happen. I don't want you two working together. I like Johnny, and I think she was stupid. You were both stupid. Livia said, many people are stupid about this. This stopped the conversation. She looked at William. She got up and left the room. Dewitt said, it looks like you weren't as careful as you thought, with Julia and others. None of your business, Dan. But William looked shocked. Dewitt stood up. He swayed a little, but then recovered. He walked back and forth. The more he walked, the more stable he became. He turned to Brady and said, I think I need to talk to Beth. No need. What will it give? You and everyone else have these little affairs. It's part of the job. I haven't done this until now. I always thought it was risky and wrong. But what Beth and I have is different. We are so compatible. I don't want this to end. William felt somewhat insecure. It was true that partners of any gender, married or not, almost all had affairs with other lawyers or employees. There was only one claim that was resolved internally. It was also true that Dewitt was an important part of the firm at this point. The pandemic has shrunk business, but the firm hasn't cut costs that much. The SEC case and likely subsequent litigation were very important to the firm's financial position. Dewitt was the man to lead it. William couldn't afford to lose Dewitt, and Dewitt knew it. There was also the matter of his own marriage, which now seemed shaky based on Livia's words. William said, Dan, she's married. It's been a good marriage so far. Now in ruins. If you and she continue, she will lose it. Maybe she's already lost. Dewitt said, I feel it strongly. It would only be a week in a lifetime. Nonsense. The week would only be the beginning if what you say about your relationship is true. I want this to develop. I saw her husband. He won't return to her. She ruined everything when she said she still wanted to go to Chicago. William thought about it. He stood up and said, I'll bring her. He knocked on Beth's door. There was no answer. He knocked louder and said, Don't hide like a child, Beth. We need to discuss what happens next. Dan is waiting. Beth heard it. She pondered her options. She loved Johnny. Perhaps she loved Dan. But Dan was married and had 3 children. Out of play, except sex. She decided she wanted both Johnny and Dan. She was trying to figure out how to do this when her father knocked. She stood up and opened the door. They didn't speak as they walked into the living room. When she walked in, she was glad to see Dan looking cheerful, if damaged. She thought he was lucky he didn't fight back better than Johnny, because she thought Johnny might have killed Dan. She said, Dan, you can't fight with Johnny. He is very angry and he will hurt you. Dan frowned. It's small. Fast, I agree. But I would have beaten him. William wanted to prevent any such confrontation. He agreed with Beth about the outcome. He said, It's simple. No matter who wins, both will lose. No fight. Dan turned to Beth. What do you really want, Beth? I want everything, of course. That is, marriage to Johnny. Sex with you. I tried to achieve this. But perhaps she took the wrong approach. I still want it. But if it's one or the other, I'll choose marriage. Sorry, you would too. Dan said, I'm not so sure about that. You can't be sure either, until we try. Beth nodded. She said, But if we try, he will definitely divorce me. If he finds out, maybe, but maybe not. I wish you would just go along with the plan. If I had done this and we had been exposed, he would definitely have left me. Pause. Damn, I don't want this. I don't want. William said, Let me see what I can do. He's very angry now, but maybe it will cool down. If not, well. Beth looked at him. Well, what? I don't know what would be appropriate yet. Dewitt asked, Beth, are we going to Chicago on Friday? She said, We'll see. Don't cancel your hotel or flight yet. She stood up and went back upstairs. Dewitt left soon after. William went to his bedroom with some apprehension. The door was not locked. He opened it and entered. Livia looked at him. She was lying in bed, leaning on her pillow and reading. She said, "You've taken me for a fool for so many years. Who's the fool now? I think, you know I love you." "I know. Some kind of love, at least." He sat down on the bed. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. She was a beautiful woman, even in her early 50s, a more mature, fuller version of her daughter. The couple were still having sex, maybe once every 2 weeks. William added to this for himself now with Julia. He always had only one mistress at a time. When he thought about it before the first time, he considered it his right as a breadwinner, as someone who provides for his family through hard work and stress, a way to relieve stress. Now he's used to it. Apparently Libya too. This matter had to be settled between them now that her knowledge had become apparent. He stood up and took off his clothes, looking at her. She watched with interest. They made love. Livia said, "Thank you, it was a pleasure." William was glad to hear this. He put off another conversation until the morning. They fell asleep. Beth called Johnny in the morning before they both went to work. To her surprise, he answered, "What?" "I want to invite you to dinner. You know, we need to talk about all this." "What? Will your father invite some thug again to scare me? Your whole family is crazy." "Not at their house, stupid man. In some good restaurants. At my expense, maybe at Rosario's." There was a bit of silence. Johnny said, "What time?" "At 7 o'clock. I'll book a table." "Okay, but I swear, Beth, if they try to intimidate me again, I will make full contact. Someone will die." "I love you, Johnny. I had nothing to do with what happened with my parents." "See you there?" He passed out. Johnny returned home after work. He didn't think that he would be in trouble now. He spent the workday evaluating documents filed with the SEC that morning regarding the merger. He assigned this to several employees. The bottom line was this: the TLC license issue was hidden in a small paragraph. It said the license was being transferred. In short, it's a lie. Johnny was surprised because this meant that the license was much more important than he thought. Otherwise, why lie? Johnny dressed casually for dinner and arrived 10 minutes late. Beth was waiting for him in a separate booth. She stood up to hug him, and he allowed it, but he was tense. They sat down. He said, "Why are we here? You seem to have made yourself clear." "I want to talk about all this, Johnny. My father. You see, he has mistresses in the company. I thought I could do the same. Dan wanted to lie. I didn't. Perhaps it was stupid of me, but I hope you won't tell his wife." "I haven't decided yet, Beth. After all, I think she should know. If this happens, this is a threat. This is a statement of fact. About my attitude. I met her. I like her. What I'm saying is that sex with Dan would just be sex. We became close while working. A little flirting. He looks good. So, are you suggesting we sleep with this guy?" "I would. Well, yes, but I don't want to lose you." "You've already lost." Johnny stood up and headed towards the exit. Beth was surprised by his sudden movement. She thought they could talk intelligently. She stood up and ran after him, attracting the attention of some other customers. She screamed, "Stop, stop. I won't do it, Johnny." He didn't stop. She caught up with him on the street in his car. He let her catch up with him. He turned to her. He looked without saying anything. "I will not do it. I won't." She cried, but more out of disappointment than sadness. At least that's how it seemed to Johnny. "What exactly do you mean? Aren't you going to Chicago? Won't you sleep with Dan? Or do you promise to be true to your wedding vows?" "All this, damn it, Johnny. I love you. I won't cheat on you." "Never?" "Well, as long as you're alive and we're married." She shook her head. "But she is a lawyer, just like him." He also shook his head. She said, "Let's go back for dinner." He went back inside with her. More curious looks. They sat back down. The waiter came over to ask about drinks, and they ordered a bottle of wine. They didn't say anything until they ordered. Beth then asked, "Why? Why is this so important to you?" "For my wife to be faithful. Didn't you go away for a week to sleep with some other guy? Do I need to explain? You could have your own affairs too. That would be fair. Maybe I should sleep with Dan's wife. Ask him what he thinks about it." "You won't." "Oh, if you can sleep with him, why can't I sleep with his wife? She's amazing and she can dance." Beth is backed into a corner. She thought that Johnny might actually seduce Margie. She saw them at a holiday party. She said, "I don't think he probably won't agree to it. They have children." "Oh, so it's about the kids. When a wife has kids, is she locked down? Are you not?" "No, damn it, I did not mean it." She got angry. She was a tough lawyer, but Johnny had forced her into an impossible position. He said, "All you big lawyers think you can do whatever you want and screw everyone. That's the problem. Your father is cheating. All the cool kids do it, so you want to do the same." "No, well, maybe I was arrogant." She lowered her head. She said, "Okay, can we just go back to normal?" "I doubt. Will you work with him?" "Yes. Well, if there is a trial after filing the application, which will definitely happen. I worked with him for 6 months. I'm drawn to him. But I'm not a woman of easy virtue, Johnny. I can keep my panties in place." "But will you, Beth?" "If I promise that I will, then I will." "You made promises at our wedding. Are you fulfilling them?" "For now, yes." "Johnny, I need to say that I'm a little confused by your attitude. Sex with Dan would be just fun. We would resolve the sexual tension that had built up over months. Why is this so important?" "Don't know. I think I need to think about this. But Beth, don't mess with this guy without my permission. I know that you are an independent person and are free to choose who you sleep with. But I am also free to react as I see fit. Right now, it will be a scam. Forever. Just think about it." She still hoped. "Can I have Margie?" Beth was indignant. "No, damn it, Johnny. Leave her alone. They have children." "It would just be fun, Beth. Ask the guy. Let's see what he says. It will be a test of character." Beth smiled. "If I ask him, he might unleash all his power on you." "Beth, he can't do anything to me. Unless you order a killer. Will he do it?" "No." "Then ask. I'm interested." "I'm fine. You asked for it yourself." They finished dinner without fully resolving the issue. Beth asked, "Should I go home? I don't like sleeping with my parents, especially now that Mom has spoken out. It's like she has a moral right." "Okay, this is our house. See you there." Yes. Johnny thought about that last remark as he drove home. He began to think that Livia might be the smartest of them all. Beth returned home. She didn't take a lot of things, so it wasn't difficult. They didn't talk much, but when Johnny got out of the shower and went to bed, Beth was naked and ready in their bed. Johnny hesitated a little, but for a long time. Then he jumped towards her. After all, she was still his faithful wife. They made love. But then they both turned over and fell asleep. The next morning, Johnny reminded Beth to ask about Margie. She rolled her eyes. When he got to work, he asked someone to find Margie's number and called her. When she answered, Johnny said, "Margie, this is Johnny Bishop." "Hi, how are you?" "Okay, for now. I'd like to invite you to dinner." "About." This was unexpected. She sounded wary. "I wanted to discuss something about our spouses. You know, they've been working together for a long time, and quite closely. They sometimes dine together." "Oh, understood. And you think we should what?" "Talk. Face to face." "Okay. Where?" "At Silvio's on Carter." "Cold. 12:30. See you." They met at 12:30 and sat in a booth. Johnny confirmed his first impression of Margie. She was a beautiful woman with red hair. He said, "So good to see you, Margie," with a smile that was a little more than just friendly. Her eyebrows rose. "You. Am I pestering you? Maybe a little bit. Margie, did Dan tell you about a work trip to Chicago next week?" "Yes, they are in the final stages of applying. They have no business in Chicago. The trip was planned for Beth and Dan only. No work matters." Margie was silent. She looked thoughtful, not stunned. "I always suspected this law firm, but as far as I know, Dan never. He wanted Beth to lie to me, but she didn't. Instead, she just told me she wanted a week with Dan." Margie had tears in her eyes. She said, "We have children. He is a good father when he is at home." Crap. Beth claims that their relationship would simply be sexual, to resolve pent-up sexual tension. I didn't accept it. I won't either. Outright threats were made by Dan and William. I feel bad about this. If they try something stupid, I'll respond. It won't be pleasant. "What threats?" "They wanted me not to tell you about it, but I thought you should know." "Thank you. Maybe." She smiled. Johnny smiled back, and both were surprised at the mutual attraction. It was immediate and strong. It flared up suddenly, like an obscene jack in the box. Margie said, "Damn." It was a kind of sigh. Johnny said, "I told Beth that if she left with Dan, I would come for you. I told her to give it to Dan." Margie chuckled slightly. She said, "He won't like it at all." "And you?" "I think I'll like it, but it would be so destructive to my life." "Why? Just sex." "It doesn't have to be just sex, Johnny." She looked at him intently. "Maybe not, Margie, but you know what? The sex will be fantastic. You are married, but if we start playing, and they do too, you can just walk away from her. And I have 3 children. He is a good father to them, and so far he has been faithful. But he was going to lie to you." "Yes." She looked sad. A sad look. "Margie, you are truly a special person, I think. If they wanted to change, I would agree. But as you pointed out, you have more at stake. We will never be permanent." She brightened. "Temporary exchange, huh? You turn me right now," she moaned. The waiter came up, but not both of them. He looked at them with a wary gaze, a little wary, that is. Johnny said, "Coffee, please." The waiter nodded and hurried away. Margie said, "If they go to Chicago, you can have me any way you want, every day while they're there." Agreed. Do you think Big Dan will agree? We need to see. I hope. She leaned over to Johnny and kissed him. The waiter brought coffee, master of bad timing. Johnny wasn't embarrassed, and he was impressed that Margie wasn't embarrassed either. Johnny said, "Let's drink this and go. Let's see what will happen next." So they did. Johnny actually considered simply asking Margie to go to the hotel that day, but he thought it wouldn't be fair to Beth. Beth was his wife. If she remains faithful, he will remain faithful too. When Beth saw Dan at work, she asked for a private conversation. They went to his office. She said, "If I go to Chicago or play with you, Johnny will divorce me. If only." "What?" "Death." "What with her?" "He may agree to an exchange. I get you, he gets her." Dan blushed and jumped out of his chair. "Wow, I'll cook his ass." "About, like that night, if I were you, I would be careful." "I didn't mean it. I'll go after him, behind his company." "Why? I mean, you want his wife. He wants yours in return. That's fair, right?" "No. And even if it is fair, I will not allow it. Margie won't allow it either. She is a mother. She is a woman, and they got along very well that festive evening. Maybe you should ask her. Then our problem will be solved. We'll have a whole week." He stared at her. "I won't. That's all. We can go to the hotel here this afternoon." I guess you don't want me as much as I thought. Johnny knew. Leave him alone and leave me alone. She left the office. That evening, when Dan returned home, Margie was there, but the children were not there. As it turned out, her mother had them. Margie was in the living room. Nothing was prepared for dinner. Dan knew he was in trouble. He said, "What? You were going to Chicago to have sex with Johnny's wife. Lied all this time. You bastard. Damn. I became close to her at work. All partners. But you still haven't cheated." "I still haven't cheated." "But you would have cheated if Johnny hadn't stopped you." Beth refused to lie to him. He wanted an exchange. "Bastard," Dan growled. "He's not a bastard. If anyone is to blame, it's you. You and his prostitute wife started this." I told her. "You wouldn't agree." He fell silent. "But you would agree, wouldn't you? You want this guy." "Yes, I want to. Like this." Margie was angry. Dan retreated. "I couldn't. Just no. Even for a week with gorgeous Beth." Dan didn't say anything, but Margie approached him. She stood in front of him. She licked her lips. She whispered, "You must be much bigger than him. You will make Beth the happiest woman on earth. We have children, and I don't. Why are you ready, if I'm much bigger?" "Dan, me and Johnny will probably get together. I'm ready because I'm attracted to him, even if he's not as big as you, or not so beautiful." Dan would fall into a catatonic state, unable to cope with the situation. Margie saw this, so she kissed him, and they made love. She smiled at him. She said, "Danny, my Danny, I'll let Johnny have sex with me whether you sleep with Beth or not. It depends on you." He said, "You're not playing fair." The voice was dreamy, submissive. "No, but you like it best when I don't play fair." He didn't say anything. "Danny, who's in charge here? Danny?" "You." "You're lucky I understand you, Danny. You're lucky I'm letting you have sex with that bitch." "I know. I am a happy man." She didn't often make him beg or show her power, but when she did, he always reacted. When she decided to control him today, she knew that asking him to agree to Johnny was a really big ask. But she decided to try, and now it seems to work. She never tried to assertively control, but now she needed to consolidate what had happened. Margie went to the kitchen and made herself a sandwich. Dan looked at himself. He was a mess downstairs. He went upstairs and took a shower. The water helped him come to his senses, and he began to worry about what had happened. He agreed to let Margie have sex with Johnny. However, he did not so much agree as he was forced by Margie. When he thought about it, he imagined Margie. With Johnny, he thought that Margie would not be able to control Johnny the way she controlled him. Perhaps Johnny will control Margie. The image of Marga surfaced in his head. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget it. That's what she wanted. Johnny, not his. He was excited thinking about it. He groaned. This wasn't the first time in their marriage that he had enjoyed the thought of her with another man. Before the kids, their friend Damon was always flirting with Margie. She flirted back, and when Dan saw it, he loved it. He imagined them sneaking away and Damon having sex with Margie. Damon never slept with Margie, but Dan thought about it a lot in those days. Damon left, and those thoughts faded. Dan never really analyzed why he reacted the way he did. He knew he had a submissive streak. Margie knew too, but rarely used this knowledge. But when she did it, he always agreed. He liked it. But afterwards, when everything returned to normal, he had a hidden feeling of discomfort due to what he considered weakness. Reflecting on this, he came to the conclusion that Marga's desire for Johnny and her simple statement that she was going to satisfy this desire, regardless of his approval, was only a more advanced form of his submission. He started to get very angry. How dare she? But he knew it wasn't Marga's fault. She would never have acted on her attraction to Johnny if he and Beth hadn't planned to go away and have sex for a week. The water began to cool, as did his anger. Dan was a man trained to calmly analyze situations. He was very, very good at it. That's why he was where he was professionally. He applied this skill to this situation. Now he put on his shorts and went downstairs. He heard Margie in the kitchen. She was naked, eating chips. She smiled. He said, "Please don't humiliate me, Margie." Her smile grew wider. "Only when we're alone, honey." Pause. "Like now." She snapped her fingers and pointed to the floor. Big Dan knelt down. Meanwhile, Johnny and Beth spent a quiet evening at home. They had gentle sex before bed. None of them really thought that Dan would agree to the trade, so they just didn't discuss it. The next day at work, Dan walked into Beth's office. He said, "We're going to Chicago." She stared at him in disbelief. "What?" "We go. I agreed for Margie to be with Johnny." "I never thought." Beth looked confused. Dan lied. "It's because I want you so much, Beth. So much so that he allowed Margie to be with Johnny." Beth was very surprised and then delighted. She said, "Besides sex, what are we going to do?" They then planned fun things to do in Chicago when they weren't at the hotel for sex. Meanwhile, Johnny received a call from Marga. She said, "Lunch?" "Certainly." Same place, same time. Big news. They sat in the same booth. Johnny was very curious. He said, "Well?" Dan agreed. "We have the whole week. The children will go to my mother on Thursday evening. See you next Saturday." She had a big, lustful smile on her beautiful face. They had the same waiter. He was wondering what he saw when he came to ask about the drinks. Margie transferred her smile to him, but did not remove her hand from Johnny. She said, "Bring us half a bottle of homemade white wine." "Yes, madam." He left. Margie said, "I think he's gotten used to us and wants to see what he can see." Johnny laughed. Johnny ordered a salad and Margie ordered a small quiche. He hurried away. They ate without further hidden contact. They planned the week. This basically meant whose house was on what day. Johnny said, "I think we should do this in both marital beds." Margie laughed. "You're sneaky, Johnny." "It's true, my dear. It's true." 2 days before the start. On Wednesday evening, Johnny and Beth discussed the whole situation. Beth felt unsure about the proposed exchange. She said, "Johnny, you won't fall in love with this woman, will you?" "Don't think. She is older than me and has 3 children. But Beth, I really want her very much." "I know. Oh, I know. You get your big handsome guy for a week. This should calm you down. It's just, well, I want you to know that I love you. When this is all over, if we do, I worry we won't be the same." "Can we be the same now? I mean, you just straight up told me you were going to sleep with another man." "Sorry about that. I was wrong. But then you turned it on its head. You're going to turn this woman into jelly and spread it on toast." They both laughed for a long time. Then Beth jumped on him. When Friday morning arrived, Johnny took Beth to Dan and Margie's house. He helped Beth into Dan's Camry. She and Margie waved goodbye. When the car was out of sight, Margie grabbed Johnny by the arm and pulled him into the house, up the stairs, and into the bedroom. She said, "Johnny, it was the best sex of my life. I will never forget this until the end of my days." Johnny won't forget either. They then showered together, laughing soapily. Margie said, "Just look at me, the former faithful mother of 3 children. Completely depraved. I'll never be the same after this." Johnny said, "Me too, Margie." She laughed. "I believe it. Let's eat. We still have a lot of work ahead." They went to the kitchen. Margie warmed up 2 sausages in the microwave while Johnny chopped up Campari tomatoes. They ate slowly, looking at each other. Margie thought a week wouldn't be enough. She said, "I want to do this in every room. Well, except for the children's rooms." Johnny completely agreed with this. They did not leave the house that day. We took a shower several times, ate dinner, and watched the news. Midnight came, and they fell asleep. On Saturday morning, they showered together again and made love. Johnny was exhausted and Margie was tired. They decided to have lunch and then go to a nearby park for a walk. Lunch was in a secluded place on the way to the park. Burgers and fries, Pepsi. The walk was leisurely. There's no rush. On Saturday night, Johnny took Margie to a dance, but to a place far enough away that they didn't have to worry about being recognized. They both got a boost of energy from dancing. They returned to her house at 11:30 and immediately ran to the dining room, which had not yet been used for sex. On Monday, they moved into Johnny's house, completing the task of having sex in all of Marga's rooms. Johnny had neighbors closer to his house than Marga had to hers, so they had to be more careful. However, they worked hard to complete the debauchery in all the rooms. Both souls, too. Margie knew she was in love. It made her a little sad because she knew she couldn't be with Johnny. She had children and a husband whom she loved. And less important to her, Johnny had a wife. The woman who was going to cheat with Marga's husband. On Thursday night, they went dancing again and had a great time. At night, they returned to Marga's house, since their spouses were supposed to return there the next day. Meanwhile, Beth and Dan had arrived in Chicago the previous Friday and checked into a hotel. It was 5 o'clock when they finally reached the room. They decided to take a shower and have dinner. Later, they made love, but it was not as they had imagined. She went to the bathroom and cleaned herself up. When she returned to bed, Dan was already asleep. Snored. At that moment, Beth knew for sure that she had made a big mistake. But there was no turning back. Johnny and Margie were no doubt in full swing. Beth knew Margie would have an amazing time. She gradually fell asleep. It was a large bed, and Dan lay facing away from it. He stopped snoring loudly. Beth had a bad dream that woke her up in the middle of the night. She woke up abruptly. She was not awakened by sleep. Dan's snoring woke her up. But she remembered the dream because she woke up in the middle of it. She started giggling into her pillow so as not to wake Dan. It was 5:30 when Beth and Dan returned to Dan and Margie's house. Johnny and Margie were waiting for them. As the car pulled up, Johnny and Margie waved and each greeted their spouse with a hug. The four did not communicate then. Johnny carried Beth's luggage to their car and they drove off. As they drove home, Johnny asked Beth, "Well, was it as good as you expected?" She said, "It's a difficult question." Why? Beth was thinking about what to tell Johnny about her relationship with Dan in Chicago. She felt sorry for Dan, but she didn't believe that Johnny and Dan would ever have to communicate. No business relationship, no personal relationships. She said, "He was terrible at the beginning. I was so disappointed that I spanked his ass. He reacted to this, and I became his owner after that. He was my slave. He loved it, so I had a really good time." Johnny thought about it. He said, "How will this work at work? I mean, I promised him I wouldn't publicly humiliate him." "What does this even mean? This week was supposed to be the end of it all." Beth looked at Johnny. She smiled at him. She asked, "How was it with Margie?" Johnny fell silent. He understood what she was leading to, but I decided to be honest. "It was amazing. Sorry. It was just as good as with you, only more often. Because it was a new experience." "Were you talking about what she's doing with Dan?" "No. We didn't talk about spouses. Does she dominate him like you do?" "Sometimes, but not as intense as me. I was merciless, in pursuit of your pleasures. And she has a family that she probably doesn't want to destroy." "Yes." Beth fell silent. "I wonder what's going on there now. They don't pick up the kids until Saturday morning." Margie and Dan went into the house. They looked at each other. Dan thought about what to say to Margie. He hasn't decided yet. She asked, "How was your week?" He looked at the floor. She was a shrewd woman, especially in relation to her long-time husband. She said, "She dominated you, didn't she?" "Yes." "So, my big man, how far did she go with you?" "Far." He unbuckled his belt and pulled down his boxers. There was a pink ribbon there, tied into a neat bow. Margie was surprised. Dan said, "She made me wear it all the way home. She said I need permission from her or you to take this off." "Can." She said, "Oh, Danny, we'll have so much fun now. Take off your clothes." He obeyed. His time with Beth has made him accept his peculiarity. When Johnny and Beth got to their house, she asked him if he wanted to see Margie again. He said, "Of course, she is great, but I don't want you to have sex with Dan or anyone else, even if you humiliate him." She was disappointed but accepted it. That was the agreement. In any case, Johnny was probably enough for her. They went upstairs. Beth asked, "Did you sleep with her today?" "Yes, right before you arrive. I'll go take a shower." Johnny has completely taken her back. Johnny and Beth had a great time over the weekend. Margie and Dan took the kids again and had a picnic on Saturday. On Sunday, they all went to the amusement park. But at night, behind closed doors, Margie cemented her dominance over Dan. She sent him to work Monday morning with the pink ribbon washed and cleaned. It was a constant reminder to him of her power. When he came to work, he was worried about Beth, his other owner. He knew he would have to work with her. She was there when he walked through the main door. He walked past her and invited her into his office. He turned and said, "We have an agreement about public affairs." Beth saw that he was still in a submissive state. She asked, "Did Margie take advantage of it when she saw the tape?" "Yes, Beth, I belong to her now. She is my wife. I can't." "Don't worry, Danny. Johnny won't let me contact you anymore. The contract was a one-time deal, and that's the end. He keeps me in it. That means here too." Fine. So 2 months passed. Johnny and Beth returned to their previous rhythm. There was a period of adaptation. Both were no longer as confident in each other as they had been before Beth wanted someone else. But all this gradually subsided. Beth didn't touch Dan at work. One day, Beth called Margie. Margie said, "Beth, can we have lunch? I need to discuss something." "Fine, but can we talk? I'll book a booth at Giorgio's tomorrow." They ended the conversation. That night, Beth told Johnny about the dinner. He was interested and glad that she informed him. At 1 o'clock the next day, Beth and Margie sat in a private booth at the restaurant. Nobody ordered alcohol. Both took salad and bread. Beth looked at Margie after they ordered. Margie said, "I would love to see Johnny again. Occasionally, I dream about him. I know I can't have him the way I would like, but..." Beth said, we're just now getting back to some kind of normality. You know, after the exchange, I don't think I can." "You don't need to see Dan. You can if you want, but you don't have to." Beth thought about it. After all, it was her proposal that started it all. She said, "I'll think about it. I'll discuss it with Johnny." "Fine. Let me know. I want to say that, Dan. Everything is different between us now. You turned him into a complete subordinate. I love him, but we used to have more than that." "Oh, sure, but Johnny won't let me get involved with Dan again. But maybe I can give in to you. Let's see." So they left it after they ate the spinach. That evening, Beth talked to Johnny about Marga's proposal. Johnny told her that he did not agree to the exchange. Beth said, "What about a night with Margie? No exchange. It's like I owe you." He said he would think about it. Beth was sure he would agree. In the end, the next day was a big one at Beth's law firm. A meeting was scheduled between the merger team and the owner of TLC regarding the license. Nobody knew who the owner was. Johnny was looking forward to this meeting. He had a proposal that included a significant increase in license fees, and he held them all in his hands. At 10 in the morning, Dan, Beth, another lawyer, and a paralegal were waiting in a large conference room to meet with the mysterious owner of TLC. There was a knock, and the secretary brought in Jerry Dolan and Johnny. Beth gasped, and Dan jumped out of his chair. Johnny smiled at them. He said, "How are you guys? with a southern accent that he didn't have. Jerry said, "I guess no one needs any introduction." Beth lowered her beautiful head onto the table. Dan returned to his seat. Johnny said, "Sorry, I surprised you so much. At first, I thought your company was really incompetent, but then I realized that none of you knew who I was, and I wasn't sure how to evaluate the license, so I did nothing and waited." He turned to Beth. "I couldn't discuss this with you, Beth, without ruining my position and yours, so I didn't. Now I have a better idea of how much the license costs for you, and I have an advantage." Beth said, "Damn it, Johnny." He replied, "You know I'm right without saying it. Now I'm talking." The last one was addressed to Dan. Jerry said, "I have a proposal here." He distributed copies to 3 lawyers and a paralegal who was a pretty young woman. Dolan was lustful and noticed these things. Beth was the first to return to normal. She started reading the documents. Dan soon followed, as did a third lawyer, William Perdue. Beth looked up first. She looked at Johnny and said, "You're going to get rich here." He said, "I could have gotten more, but as you've probably realized, Beth, I'm already rich." Dan said, "Is this a formal proposal?" Johnny said, "Almost. There's one thing, Dan. We need to discuss this privately. Is there another room?" The secretary was called, and Dan and Johnny went into a small room along the adjacent corridor. Dan said, "What? Because if it's personal." "It's personal. I'm willing to make this deal, which is good for everyone, but I want your wife." Dan was stunned and jumped out of his chair. He was about to climb over the small table when he remembered his last physical encounter with Johnny. He stopped, but his face turned red. Johnny said, "You did everything you could to seduce my wife. You interfered in my marriage. Literally, we both know how it ended, but Margie and I just clicked. Physically and otherwise. I want it once a month, all night long. First Saturday." Dan was stunned. He said, "She will not agree to." Johnny smiled. "I believe she will agree. It won't have any real impact on your marriage, just one night a month." I can't just give her away." "Not forever, Danny. And, based on what I've heard about you, I think you might even like it. Just imagine her coming back to you on Sunday morning, maybe even boasting. What fun she could have for you." "It's none of your business. I mean, damn." Dan was usually good at keeping his business separate from his kinky sex life, but not now. He said, "It's like selling it to you. She is not a woman of easy virtue. If she says no, then fine. All you do is not interfere if she agrees. You're not selling it. You're really selling permission to her. And like I said, it's not something you're going to hate. You'll love it." Johnny smiled at him, and it wasn't a friendly smile. Dan was defeated. He was looking down. He couldn't look Johnny in the eye. He said, "I agree." The two of them returned to the main conference room where the papers were signed. The other agreement was not formalized. Johnny was sure that Dan would not break his word. Johnny and Beth left the meeting together. Johnny arrived with Jerry Dolan, and Beth drove him home. During the trip, Beth asked about a private meeting. She was no longer angry about the surprise. She thought about what Johnny said, and it all made sense. She was in a way delighted with him. But she was really interested in a private meeting with Dan. She said, "Johnny, what were you talking to Dan about?" "Oh, death. About, well, I told you you have a free pass. I guess you're going to use it." "Yes, first Saturday of every month." "No, did he agree to this?" "Yes. He is a subordinate. He's probably delighted. But I didn't agree to a permanent relationship. Johnny." "No, I know, and Beth, I don't want to lose you. But Margie and I are really hot for each other. Maybe." You bastard. You bastard. You want us both at once. Every man's dream." Johnny looked at his wife. He stopped the car in the driveway. He looked at her, nodding. He said, "Eventually." She sat motionless. Johnny watched her carefully as she thought about it. He got out of the car and opened its door. He took her hand and led her inside and upstairs. It took him almost an hour to get her consent. And later, once a month, the threesome continued for 16 months, including the first 6 months of Beth's pregnancy. For the past 3 months, Johnny and Margie have been dating without Beth. When little Elizabeth was born, Beth worked hard to get back into shape. Margie and Beth became very close by that time. Sometimes they met without Johnny. Dan was initially horrified that he was sending his wife to another man for the night. But when Margie returned that first Sunday, she gave him the biggest, most sexual experience he had ever had. He's been on board ever since. As for Livia and William, William had to agree to certain marital terms to avoid a messy and expensive divorce. Oh, how low the mighty have fallen. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.